My name's Don Rose, and I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, political consultant. And back in 1968, I was an organizer and the press secretary, press liaison for the National Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, which was the principal organizing body for the demonstrations and the march and all the planning around the 68 Democratic Convention. I had been involved in a lot of activity in Chicago before that. I was Dr. Martin Luther King's press secretary a couple of years earlier when he was running his Chicago campaign, and fell into this protest pretty naturally. I have been very politically active from my teens. In 1948, I was passing out leaflets for Henry Wallace. I was involved in many protests, heavily involved in the civil rights movement, the peace movement, for years and years. So this was just going to be another stop on the way. I can't remember when I wasn't involved. It started out as being something I had been doing before, organizing and trying to publicize protest actions. So it was another action that was coming up, and the preliminary organizing was very similar to everything I'd done before. Press releases, speeches, going to meetings. We didn't have the internet and social media. We had mimeograph machines and telephone trees. The events of 1968 prior to the convention is what made it a very different experience. So many things were happening. You know, Martin Luther King was murdered, the West Side went up in flames. Mayor Daley's reaction was horrendous: shoot to kill, shoot to maim. A few weeks later, we had an Easter Peace March where we were going peacefully into the Civic Center, and we were met by a phalanx of policemen who just started beating heads and people and hitting people, arresting people for doing nothing more than a legitimate march right into the convention. There wasn't any disorder. This Easter Peace March had been going on for 4 or 5 years. So we knew by that violence that this was going to be a different experience. We had previously seen the police hostile to demonstrators, but never anything that was clearly organized and planned against us. And it was, I can't say exactly shocking, because we were quite cynical about the police anyway, but it was nevertheless a horrendous experience. After all the violence of the convention and Mayor Daley's action at the convention, where he, cussed out very important national political figures, and all of the violence that took place, a lot of the city of Chicago was radicalized. It doesn't mean they turned into socialists immediately, but they were bitter about the war anyway, and then the repression they saw in their own backyards helped create an independent political movement very soon after the convention. Political organization was formed on the North Side that elected the first North Side independent alderman, just less than a year after 68. It went on to elect dozens of delegates to the Illinois Constitutional Convention, and it kept building. We never defeated Mayor Daley, but we certainly, in the course of the next, say, 10 years, won congressional seats away from the machine. We won state rep seats, aldermanic seats, and so on. And this was a movement that built. It had high points and low points. It helped elect Jane Byrne mayor, and when she disappointed, it replaced Jane Byrne with Harold Washington. And one can eventually draw a line from the election of Harold Washington to making Barack Obama a U.S. Senator, and which was then his launching pad for the presidency. I would say that this was, in many ways, the most positive aspect of what came out of the convention, despite the fact that there was still a lot of rebellion against us. Eventually, the war ended, I would say in some significant measure because of our demonstrations and demonstrations elsewhere, the killing at Kent State. So looking back, it was an important pivot point in the socio-political history of this country. I never spend a week or two, particularly in times like this, thinking back on what went on there and the importance in my own personal life, and feel that I also made a contribution to Chicago and national history.